folks who went before us blazed the trail to history. The heritage they left behind is part of you and me. All the dreams they still live on, and it makes me proud to be a living, breathing part of it all, the American legacy.
You want to put some oil in it? Put some oil in this oil cup here.
Right in here?
Yeah.
How about that grease pen?
Put some pressure on that. Run that down a little, will you please?
All right.
That's right. That oil's our crank pin. It greases it. I rebuilt this old engine. Spent a lot of time on it. Rebuilt it back to the 1870
Oh, it looks great.
period, yes, sir. It burns wood, as it did in those days, or coal, either one. Say, let's get up in the cab.
All right.
John, let me have those.
All right.
Put that in. Put some wood in the firebox, will you, John? You see, this is part of his job. He does this because he sits over there and he's got to look after it to keep up steam. And you can see we got steam up now.
Oh, yeah. Right.
By the way, would you like to run the engine, John?
Oh, I'd love
Well,
to.
climb up there in the engineer's seat box. I'll show you what you have to do. The first thing you have to do now to make it move, you push the reverse lever forward.
All right.
Like that. Then you take the air brake off, push this head, like that. Then you whistle a couple of toots now. All right, now here's the throttle. Pull the throttle back, easy on it, and it'll start moving ahead. Now she's moving.
All right.
You're going right along here, man. Yeah, absolutely.
This is fun.
All right. Yes, sir. Moving right along.
How would you like to have an old locomotive like this to call your own? Mr. Rohr bought this steam engine, the tender, the passenger car, the baggage car, and the caboose to help preserve part of this country's early railroad history. The first trains, however, hardly resemble what you see here. This is one of the first steam-powered trains in America, the DeWitt Clinton, now on exhibit in the Henry Ford Museum. It made its first run on iron rails in New York State. The year, 1831. Top speed, 30 miles an hour. By 1860, trains not only went faster, but they were traveling to cities like Chicago and New Orleans. Laying new iron tracks, however, was becoming very costly.
Senator, the railroad companies will agree to expand in the South and out west if Congress will give them free land to sell to the thousands of new settlers wanting to move there. But you know as well as I, building railroads cost money.
And with help from the United States government, railroad companies did expand, helping to settle new territories out west. Two companies, the Union Pacific and Central Pacific, even completed the first transcontinental railroad. From Promontory Point, Utah, on May 10, 1869, a message was telegraphed to President Grant in Washington.
Do you mean to tell me that I can travel now all the way from Omaha to California by train?
Yes, ma'am. And it'll take you only 4 days instead of the 3 weeks by stagecoach. We even have sleeping cars called Pullmans.
Hey, Lorenzo! As soon as you get those Longhorns loaded up, tell the engineer to get this thing moving. Those cows got to be at the meat packers in Chicago by the end of the week.
Freight was becoming as important to railroad companies as passengers. New steel rails replaced old iron rails. Coal was now the fuel that kept the trains moving on schedule. And Chicago, because of its location and business interests, was becoming the railroad center of America. Products that were made in the East had new markets in the West. New towns and factories grew up along new railroad tracks. For the first time, people could afford to travel long distances to visit and sightsee America. By 1960, even the steam locomotive had changed into a diesel-electric locomotive. much more powerful and efficient. And most of the train loads, well, they no longer included passengers. It was freight. In fact, today, 95% of all the money earned by U.S. railroads comes from hauling freight. Each day, over 10,000 freight trains run from one part of our country to another, bringing us oranges from California and Florida, oil from Louisiana, automobiles from Detroit, coal from Wyoming. 1,001 different items of freight needed by us in our towns and cities everywhere. This is the workhorse of the railroad, the ordinary, everyday freight car. It may not be too attractive, but then it wasn't built for looks. It was built to carry great amounts of freight. Put 70 of these big freight cars together and you've got the average size freight train in America. Many of them being put together right here in this large Chicago freight yard. Here are where freight trains are put together with row upon row of tracks, each reserved for loaded freight cars that will make up a particular train. Each freight car is sorted out from this single track running up a low hill that is called the hump. Automatically, in the tower above, each freight car is classified by computer, weighed, and sent down the hill to be switched onto the right track and joined to the right train. The job is never ending. 2,000 freight cars every 24 hours. What happened to the passenger cars? Well, most passenger trains in this country of ours are now scheduled under the corporate name of Amtrak. And since most people prefer to fly or drive their own cars, there are very few Amtrak passenger trains put together anymore for long-distance travel. In fact, of all the millions and millions of miles that people travel in this country, the railroad passenger cars account for less than 1% of the total. And yet, for short distances, passenger cars do provide a very useful service in and around large cities, especially as commuter trains.
Western Springs next.
Each working day, hundreds of thousands of people who live in suburbs and on the edges of cities like Chicago ride on commuter trains. They travel 10, 20, 30 miles to work in the morning and back home in the evening, without having to worry about driving or parking their car in the big city. In the heart of Chicago, some train tracks are even elevated above ground to form the well-known loop, as it's called, helping to make traffic less crowded on the streets.
Logan Square will be next to Versi Kesey, change the day train.
They have even put tracks under the ground as a subway to carry more people faster in and around this huge city and its suburbs. Freight trains, passenger trains, commuter trains, and subways, transporting goods and people in and out of the city. Chicago is one of the largest railroad centers in America. It also has the world's busiest airport.
Clear to land on the left, Continental 865.
From this tower at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, landing or takeoff directions are given each year to more than 500,000 aircraft.
Now at 445, position hold 32 right after the company DC-8 departs.
And 777 is clear for takeoff.
On busy days, that can average more than one airplane taking off or landing every minute.
America 454, come in the north-south, use the outer, give way to the Delta 1011 coming out the north-south to the outer.
The job of these air traffic controllers is like that of a policeman on a busy street corner, keeping the traffic moving smoothly and rapidly as possible, but above all, safely. And they don't need a whistle to do it. Instead, they use a variety of electronic devices, complicated radar equipment, an instrument landing system, and the all-important radio contact back and forth with the pilots. Each day, enough passengers get on or off these planes to fill up a city with 100,000 people. And some planes don't even carry people. They carry freight, tons of it. There is shrimp from Louisiana, television parts bound for New Jersey, fresh flowers from California. Yes, even an automobile that will be delivered to Boston, Massachusetts. This air cargo jet can carry over 100 tons of freight for some 5,000 miles before refueling. It seems incredible that with such weight, the plane will even get off the ground and fly. And yet it will. thanks to two brothers who long ago solved the problems of getting a heavier-than-air machine to fly. Here in Greenfield Village is one of the most historically significant buildings in America, the Wright Brothers Cycle Shop. It's been restored to look just exactly like Orville and Wilbur left it long ago in Dayton, Ohio. It was here the two brothers operated their bicycle business. More importantly, it was here that they performed experiments and built the parts for the first successful airplane in the world. They even used a bicycle wheel mounted like this to help prove their theories about how an object could fly. To test wing design, they built this wind tunnel, believed to be the first of its kind anywhere. For long hours, the two brothers would talk, build, argue, and experiment. Even late at night, at the family home next door, the talking and arguing continued, usually in the kitchen.
Orville, we've been through all that before. There isn't a company around that can build us a gasoline engine that will deliver at least 8 horsepower and still weigh less than 200 pounds. And if the engine weighs any more than that, we'll never get the machine off the ground.
Unless we increase the surface area of the two wings to give us more lift.
And if we do that, it will mean shifting the center of gravity and redesigning the whole structural arrangement. Now, we've tested the glider 1,000 times out at Kitty Hawk. We know it works. Even the shape of the wings is confirmed by our wind tunnel experiments. Let's not change the glider anymore to put a heavier engine on it.
All right. Then we'll build the engine ourselves.
You don't mean you and me.
You and me and Charlie Taylor.
You can't be serious.
Why not, Wilbur? Charlie's the best metalsmith around. He built those bike parts for us in a week.
Yeah, but a 4-cylinder, water-cooled gasoline engine is considerably more complicated than hardware for a bike.
Look, if we could locate a cast aluminum block, it might well solve much of our weight problem. We could then use cast iron pistons and rods. Charlie could build the whole thing for us right in our own shop. We've got the tools and the lathe.
What about the propellers? Now, who's going to make them?
Disagreement between the two brothers often led later to compromise and finally to success in each step of building their flying machine. It was their way of thinking out loud, to test their theories and solve each problem. By December of 1903, Orville, Wilbur, and the completed airplane were back on the sand dunes at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, where wind conditions were more consistent for attempting a flight. It was December 17th, 1903. The first flight lasted only 12 seconds, covering a little over 120 feet. But it was, nevertheless, the first in the history of the world in which a machine carrying a man had raised itself by its own power into the air in full flight. Later that same day, the two brothers, each taking their turn, flew their machine 3 more times, each flight more successful than the one before. It was the birth of aviation, the beginning of controlled flight, of man propelling himself through the skies, first in awkward-looking aircraft at very slow speeds, today in streamlined jets flying at unbelievable speeds. And what about the future? Well, knowing man's creative genius, it will be only a matter of time before the next step is added to the heritage of Orville and Wilbur Wright. Perhaps you will even have the chance to help make it possible.
We have main engine ignition.